Hello, hello again. It's me, Kimmy Moon. Um, and today I'm going to go over that Snowflake feature, which I think is probably one of the best places to start with the creation of your actual document or manuscript. So, what the Snowflake feature does, in essence, is it gives you a place to kind of expand the imagination in the valley of what if. So I have three of them. Well, there's actually more than three. We're going to go ahead and open a new one just so you can see what it looks like when it's brand new. So to make a new one, you click on the little snowflake icon. Then you're going to give it a name. And then you're going to click on this little plus button, and it creates it in your list. So here's the new one that's called This Is New. And I'm going to click on the little pencil thing to edit. Okay, now, when it starts, it's just going to give you the one box and then this little ladder piece. When you click on the ladder, it's going to open three more boxes. Now, in order to get this to show up completely on the screen, I shrank the box down so it's at almost 67, so it's really small. If I were to increase this to 100, you probably won't be able to see all of these, and you would have to kind of scroll back and forth with the little scroll bars in order to get to the additional boxes. Alright, so now I went ahead and put in that this would be the start. Notice at the top you have the part that says title. That's going to come out darker and bolder so it stands out. Then in the box, you can write as much as you want in here. Now, because of how the Snowflake tool operates, I would not suggest writing a lot of anything, because these boxes will disappear as you're building, as you're adding on to your story. So I started with Jeff falls off a cliff, and then up here we can say, okay, so what happens after Jeff falls off a cliff? He can be rescued by Dave. Okay, I know that's probably spelled badly. Okay, let's see. Yeah, this is really small on my screen, so pardon me. Okay, so we could say he's rescued by Dave. We could say that he's found by a dog. We could say that he's badly injured and he thinks he's gonna die. Okay, so those are three what ifs that can happen when Jeff falls off the cliff. Okay, so now if you are the type of person who plans out a lot of what you're trying to write, like if you do whole outlines, you could then decide, okay, then I'm gonna have Jeff fall off a cliff and he's going to be rescued by a dog. And if that's what you've decided on, then you could take those two notes and go to your map or your grid planner and then plug that in, and now you have chapters 1 and 2, however you want to do that. If you're a person who kind of, writes as you go, then you can go back and you can leave this the way it is and then just edit the little sections to indicate what you would want or what happens, even if you started off with, yep, he's rescued by a dog, but then as you're writing the scene, the dog isn't any help and he runs off and he gets another character, and then, at some point, now he was rescued by a dog initially, but then, Dave shows up and it turns out the dog belongs to Dave, because, sometimes that happens. Then you can go in and just kind of, you can move the things around with a lot of cutting and pasting in this section in the Snowflake. Okay, now, for those who will write a section, or rather, for those who get caught in rabbit holes, I'll put it that way. If you're the kind of person, because I find that, I do this as well, where it's like, ooh, well, that'll be a good idea, and then this can happen, and that can happen, and this can happen. You might get stuck where you're just adding and adding and adding, but you never go back and write it. So this little feature right here, when you click on this, it's going to ask you if you want to replace the card. The card they're talking about is the one that you wrote initially. If you click on this to delete this card, it deletes everything connected to this card. So that's fair warning. Do not delete this card unless you're trying to get rid of this entire scenario. So if you decide, oh my God, this is stupid, I do not want Jeff falling off the cliff, then you would erase this, which is going to knock out all the options of what would have happened if he fell off the cliff. Now, what you can do, which is what I found myself doing, is I put this, I'm going to take this, and I'm going to put this as the new title so that I know that these are all things that can happen if Jeff fell off a cliff. All right. So if Jeff falls off a cliff, then this can happen, or this can happen, or this can happen. I still haven't decided. Okay. So now if I click on the go arrow and I say yes, then the first card is now gone, and I have the 3 options of what would happen if Jeff falls off the cliff. Okay. Notice how I now have 3 ladders as well. So if I decide that, okay, I like the idea of him being found by a dog, so I'm going to continue the story from here. Now, once I decide to continue the story from here, I can get rid of this one and say, I don't like the idea of putting Dave into this scenario. So I'm going to just delete the Dave one. And now my story will continue from him being rescued by a dog. Okay, so you see how that works? If I decide that, what, I'm not sure I really like the dog part by itself, I think he's going to be badly injured first. Okay, so now I'm going to add 3 more cards. So he's going to be badly injured and then rescued by the dog. And then what happens? And then you do the same thing. Now you have a what if of, okay, so if he's rescued by a dog, maybe he now has a major injury because the dog dragged him by his wrist. And Jeff was a pianist, and so now his career is in jeopardy because the dog tried to save him and grabbed him by the wrist, and he dragged him, and now his hand doesn't work, and so forth, right? So basically, you have all these what ifs that you can fill in, and if you're using it the same way I just demonstrated, then you could just start with the same thing, that he's rescued by a dog, and by being rescued by a dog, he suffers a grave injury, or he finds the love of his life, or he winds up with what is that called, rabies, and now Jeff has to decide, does he go through a horrible torture to save the dog, or will he watch his rescuer be put down by the vet, and then he falls for the vet, whatever. So at the end of the day, that's what the snowflakes are for. It just allows you to keep going and going and going. I think the really cool thing about the snowflake is that it does kind of force you, because you don't want to lose what you wrote, so it forces you to continue the story while acknowledging what you decided was going to happen in the story. All right, so now I'm going to pop back over to the snowflake feature, and if you go down here, you can find it in the main menu. Now I have a lot of these up here at this point. This one I think is an empty one that shows where if you go ahead and set up your first card, all right, this is already at the 2nd level, you can continue you can continue if you need to give yourself more boxes. So like now I have 3 boxes to start with over here, and I have 3 boxes to start with down here. So for each of these, I can give myself 3 more boxes. So if you need a lot of room for lots of ideas, you can build the snowflake to this size and then start filling in boxes, if that would help you to decide which direction you want your story to go. If it's distracting, then you want to use the main setup, which kind of says, okay, we started here. These are your options. Go write that before you start adding all this. Because see how many boxes you can wind up with? For somebody who's easily distracted, this could be a mess. But for someone who needs lots of options and room to grow, this would be awesome. Okay, so just pointing that out, that there are multiple ways to use the snowflake feature. All right, so we're going to go back to snowflakes again, and I'm going to show this one. Now, this is when I first started playing around with it, and so I had created an opening scene when I realized this story sounds familiar. Oh, because I have 3 other stories that fit the scenario for this particular story that I intended to write. Okay, so I took an opening scene from another story that I had started and decided I'm going to use that to open this scene. And then the other opening scene from a similar story will be this opening scene. And then have that segue into some of the other scenes that I know that have already, I already have a draft for those. So I'm in essence taking several different stories and combining them to turn this into a soap opera. And I decided to do a soap opera because I change ideas so fast in my head in order to make it so I always have something I can write and something I can work on that can go in any random direction I want it to go in, because that is kind of the nature of a soap opera. Anyone who's ever watched one, I personally don't like them, but I'm writing one anyway. If you notice, it's like you have a premise of a story, and then it's like at the end or the middle of every story, it's like you get the dun dun dun, I thought he was my son, and it turns out he's my cousin, dun dun dun, whatever. So with the constant aha moments that occur in your, average soap opera style stories, this always gives me something random to write. So if I ever reach a point where, the other story just isn't, it's not exciting enough for me to want to write that next chapter, because that does happen, I can pop over and write something really outlandish over here. And in some cases, that's going to jar loose the idea of, wait a second, you're right, I could make that guy get hit by a car, and so forth and so on. So this was a way of taking old ideas and being able to plug them into a new, a whole new concept without my having to kind of cut and paste and export the entire document over here. I can, feel my way through to decide, is this really how I want to do this? And then get down to writing it instead of, doing what I would normally do, which is to find, take 2 hours to find the old document, copy and paste it, then I got to organize it and figure out what chapter goes where. The Snowflake option makes that a lot easier when, when dealing with random stuff, for people who think way off out in the left, for writers like myself who you never know what you're writing and when, you just know you're writing, okay? This is the one we just worked on. Now, this is also a way to start fleshing out who enters the room next, okay? So when I first started using Snowflake, I was like, okay, well, let me start writing out which characters come in. So I wound up with Jason, Cal, and Vince. Well, as it turned out, as these characters showed up, I started coming up with their backstory. Well, I don't necessarily want to store their backstory here because I'm going to use the wave cards for that. But this is a good way to figure out, okay, so when do they enter the story? And what are they bringing to the table? So we started out the story with the introduction of the main, the people who run these places. And then we have the characters starting to meet each other as they're assigned roommates and so forth. And so when I got down to adding these 2 characters who are not in my original story, we have Cal and Vince, who, as it turns out, one of them knows who the other guy is, and the other guy doesn't know who the other guy is. And they're not exactly friends. but they don't know that, right? Only the guy who recognizes the other guy has any idea how he feels about the other person. As far as the other person's concerned, he just thinks, oh, new guy, nice to meet you. So in that regard, it kind of allows for the beginning phases of the interaction between the characters, again, without having to write out the entire scene. It gives a premise of, oh, so that's what's going to happen. Now, another cool thing is that, as I'm going back and forth showing you how the snowflakes work, you can have as many of these as you want, which helps to flesh out, like, okay, so if the first assignment is to, perform in a movie in which the two guys are going to have to do something they don't want to do, that could lead to a fight. If they're fighting and it spills over to school, now they have to explain to guys at school what they're fighting about. Well, they don't want to tell the guys at school that this is their part-time job to pay for their room and board. So as they start doing things at school, you can add your side characters in a whole new document. Like, we go back to our This Is New, and we can now add all these different guys because they're not really important enough for the story at that moment. But you'd be able to reference back and say, oh, that's what that guy's name was. The one who broke up the fight, oh, that was Derek. So the snowflakes, the way it's set up, it really does allow you to kind of use it as a back and forth reference point. Now, the main thing is you're going to have to know how you think while using it. Because, like, for me, I know that I'm very good at putting things in various boxes and then remembering which box is which, as long as they have appropriate labels that will trigger the thought for me. That does not work for everyone. Most people, I would say most people, are way more organized in thought than I am. So for me, my brain works better in chaos. Like, everything around me is organized, but it's organized in a way in which I know what it is. Like, I know if I'm glancing at the red drawer in my crafting room, it's probably going to contain all the sharp items. Why? Because red reminds me of Red Cross. Red Cross reminds me of blood. If I'm thinking of blood, I'm thinking of sharp things that can cause you to bleed, right? Most people are not going to do that. And so, by default, they're probably not color coding based on, that far out in the left kind of framework. So, the reason I mention that is because you can use the snowflakes, but as long as you have a method for your own madness, you should be able to use it well. I think that Wavemaker is really a great, versatile program because it allows you to use whatever tool you need to use in any way, shape, or form, any way that you see fit. I'm going to do a separate video that will cover a lot of the shortcuts in terms of well, not really shortcuts, but like using a lot of the text-based pre-programming. For those of you who are old enough to remember WordPad and Notepad and all the stuff that used to be text-based, I think there was one called like Card File and stuff like that. There were codes, like you could use, how we use Control-C to copy, or, the XZ and all those different keys. Well, there are some that we don't really use as much anymore, but that are useful with Wavemaker, because in the document, Wavemaker gives you the menu to just be able to make an asterisk, make a bullet, make this and that. But in the subsequent programs like Snowflake and Mind Map and so forth, you would need to know that, like, if you want to make something show up in bold, you need to know that Control B would do that, because it's not, it'll work in the document because you can click on the little B, but you'll have to know the codes for the other segments. Okay, so that's pretty much how Snowflake works. And I want to make sure that the tutorial makes a little bit more sense. So that was kind of like an overview of how you use the snowflakes. I just showed you how I choose to use it. To me, that is where I'm going to begin writing this soap opera, is by kind of giving myself a jumping off point, you know, taking all the pages or ideas from 3 other stories, smashing them together, and then organizing how does that fit and interact in the soap opera that I'm naming Studio 99. And I'll let your imagination explain what 99 means. And for reference, it's like 69. Just imagine the numbers in 99 instead of 69. So if you look at it long enough, you know what it is, okay? So nonetheless, that's what the soap opera is based on. And so I will start with that. And so for the rest of the tutorial, I will be using that as the premise to show how each of the sections of Wavemaker work together to make this into one big story. Another reason for using the soap opera instead of a regular novel is because the nature of a soap opera is that it veers off from place to place and goes in cycles and circles, whereas your novel generally is going to have a beginning, middle, and end, or, you know, act 1, 2, and 3, and so forth. I don't think if I were to try to do just, you know, your standard beginning, middle, and end, I could not really show you how each of the features work in great detail, because you really wouldn't need, you know, it's not going to expand that much. And my boredom level would kick in. I could not, I don't think I could demonstrate and write without wanting to just, you know, say, okay, forget it, and keep changing stories. Okay, so I would say that in conclusion, the most important part of all this is that if you click the link in the description, it's going to take you to my actual tutorial. And I'm going to explain that in another video so that you'll know how to use the program and walk through the program completely. And you can access all that information. It's free. I'm not charging anything for it. I'm just setting it up to where anyone can access it. And then whenever you need to reference it, you just go straight over there and click whatever you need to click to find the answers. And I think that's just an easier way of providing this information without it turning into long, you know, 20-minute videos. Okay, that's enough of that. And that's how you use snowflakes. And feel free to ask any questions that you want covered, because I can find the answer for you, and then I will post those answers either under the videos or in the blog, where, you know, there are typed out detail of the same thing I just said, but it's typed out, you know, step by step. Okay, well, talk to you later. Hope you have a good one. Bye.